sitting at the Carlisle bar having a drink, right? And this guy comes in with a gunshot wound, staggers out of his car, gunshot wound.
Yeah.
He had just left his wife off at the front door and said, I'll go park my car, instead of giving it to the valet. Dumb bunny. So he drops her off at the front door, he goes around the alley, and he's coming back around. Some crackhead, kaboom, right through the windshield, hits this guy in the shoulder. The guy drives around to the valet, gets out of his car, and he staggers up bleeding into the bar. And Andrew said, you look like a man that needs a martini.
He did.
That's what he said to her.
You know, I never got caught up in the partying scene and in the drug scene and all. You know, I witnessed it all, you know, and I saw who did what. Eventually, every drug dealer went to jail. You know, it was a matter of time until the DEA came in and busted and traced everybody who's spending money. You know, and, you know, you're making that type of money, spending it, they're sitting there tracking you. Eventually, they all went to jail. I remember Willie Falcone and Sal Magutta, you know, they were in federal court downtown. They walked out of court, you know, they went out to go to the bathroom, and they walked out and came out, and instead of disappearing out of the country, they went and hid in Palm Beach, and they're coming in disguises at night back to Club New like no one's going to see them, you know.
The wise guys were always in Miami, you know, before Castro kind of kicked everyone out of Cuba. That was kind of the hangout spot for a lot of people from New York. My relatives, like the older aunts and uncles, they would fly to Miami, they'd leave their wives in Miami, and the men used to go to Cuba and do their gambling and whoring and whatever they were doing. So mobsters that were on the beach, at that time, a lot of guys had moved to Miami because they wanted to clean up their money. When John Gotti went down in New York City in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of his associates, they were all getting busted too. So they basically needed to clean up money to take care of their families while they went away. Everybody knew South Beach as the best money laundering place from the 70s and 80s with all the drug cartels. So it was a no-brainer. A lot of these guys were already lying low in Boca, and South Beach just all of a sudden just kind of got hot.
Bad son of a bitch. Bad son of a bitch.
When you fly into Miami, it was a nightmare to get from the airport to South Beach. And a lot of people would get off in Overtown, which made the Bronx look like a cakewalk. I mean, it was scary.
You know, you come from Miami, the airport, and you're coming through to get to the beach. If you get off that highway, you're going to land in the ghetto, chances are. I mean, it's a bad neighborhood right there. So if you actually got off because you saw the big city lights, you know, and you got off before you got to the beach, downtown Miami was a dead zone. I mean, at nighttime, it shut down. There was nothing open. But right next to it was, you know, Liberty City, which was a really bad neighborhood. And, you know, if you actually stopped and was lost in the neighborhood, you were in trouble. You were definitely going to get robbed.
I remember one incident where they literally dragged the mom and the husband out of the car, and they ran the woman over.
Smoke the shit, start robbing old people and things of that sort. Cause ain't shit illegal until you get caught. And it's alright to listen since JT.
Back then? Well, back then you would rent the car, and the car would have a Z on the license plate, and you knew that it was a rental.
These tourists were being victimized. What would happen is they would fly into Miami International Airport, rent a car, and the cars were very distinctive back then. The rental cars were very distinctive. They would either have a decal somewhere on the windshield, or their tag would say Hertz, Avis, Enterprise, or it would start with a Z. So everybody knew that they were rental cars, and a criminal element would target them.
But every tag on a rental car had a Z on it. So it was like a target for them. They would follow the cars. They would stick around the airports, waiting for people to leave the airports. And when they'd see somebody, you know, looking, I guess, easy for a target, and they saw the tag, they'd be for sure that it's a rent-a-car, they'd follow them and either bang them, they would either from behind and make them get out of their cars and end up robbing them.
So you get bumped by somebody,
correct,
and you know you'd stop to see what kind of damage was being done to your car, and then you would get robbed. Yeah. But then a friend of mine named Bobby Radical created this really cool T-shirt that said "Welcome to Florida," and it had the shape of Florida and shaped as a gun.
So back in the 90s, there was some, I think there was a couple like murders and stuff with some German tourists and everything, and then for a couple of years the model industry was affected by that.
When the first German tourists were killed,
in Florida, it had quite a big impact. I mean, Germans stayed away from South Florida and until it blew over. It's, I mean, time, makes people forget things, but at the time, nobody came near here. They were scared.
Like affected Miami for like years. Then little by little, everybody realized that where there's some isolated cases.
Oftentimes, coming from Miami Airport to South Beach, they would get lost and exit on Northwest 12th Street or Little Havana area and become victims of a crime. There were a few murders, and it hit Newsweek, I believe, or it was the infamous Florida shaped like a gun, and it was very bad for tourism. And at that time, we established a robbery interdiction team. We called it TRAP, Tourist Robbery Apprehension Program. And I wasn't a part of it, but it was very successful. And all these gentlemen did is kind of look out for tourists and kind of watch them get to their hotel safely.
So everybody came back to Miami. But yeah, it was like 4 or 5 years that Miami really was hurt by the violence and everything. Because I remember that back in the days, Miami was a little bit, Miami Beach started, it was still like fights, violence, like fights in bars, on the streets and everything.
La vida te da sorpresa, sorpresa te da la vida.
As I said, the Marielitos had come here a few years before, I guess between 79, 80, 81. So the apartment buildings in the Flamingo Park neighborhood were converted to crack houses, flop houses.
When we had the Cuban exodus, the Mariel boat lift, this is where all of them showed up. This is where all of the Cubans were put into or were pretty much forced into. And it was a very crazy kind of situation at that time because there were a lot of different characters that were not very good.
Fidel Castro opened up his jails and unloaded every prisoner that he had. So we had a kind of a unique mix of Marielitos, we used to call them. We had the kind that were incarcerated by the federal government for many years and then let go and came to South Beach. We had the type that had committed crimes, spent a couple years in prison, and were now getting out, and they were committing crimes.
We brought our bankers down, and we parked across from what is now, where China Club is now, or was. Not China Club, China Grill. The Harrison Hotel, right across from that. Some Cuban Marielito had opened up the hood of his car, taken the caps off his battery, and threw the acid from the battery into this neighbor. So the banker looked at us and said, "You people are crazy." Got in his car and drove away. Immediately. That was the end of that. So that's how dangerous it was.
And we had a huge influx of people from Mariel. We had a lot of well-intentioned people that were going to Cuba to get their relatives, to bring them over, only to find that their boats were being loaded with Castro's prisoners and people that lived in his mental asylums. Some of these people had been in prison 25, 30 years for horrendous crimes, knew no other life, and they were being dumped on the streets of South Florida.
At one point, I remember when we first started, just to give a little perspective, when we first started doing, the police wanted to take all the lighting on Ocean Drive because before it started taking off, it was all Mariel, a lot of Mariel refugees down there, a lot of problems with crime. They wanted to erect all crime lights, big yellow vapor lights.
A guy wanted to dance with this girl. Well, the problem was she had a boyfriend. Boyfriend didn't take too kindly to it. So he roughs up the guy and kicks out the guy who wants to dance with his girlfriend. He comes back with a machete and stabs him. And he's just standing there. Nobody's doing anything. I mean, there was just nothing that.
And no one's stopping it either. Like, oh, nice machete.
I mean, what are you gonna do? And there's blood everywhere. The guy's dead on the floor. I mean, those are the kinds of crazy things happen because there was no law and order.
That doesn't happen at the Pottery Barn.
All of South Beach was rough. It just attracted a very hardcore, group of followers.
Now, Miami Beach wasn't alone in this problem, but Miami Beach at the time had a large amount of low-income housing that was caused by the building memorials south of 6th Street.
Imagine, south of 5th Street, it was a tunnel. It was dark,
deserted.
dangerous. no one really ventured south of 5th unless you want to get shot, killed, or buy drugs.
Then, of course, down below, unfortunately, it wasn't going that smoothly. For people living below 5th Street on South Beach, they had, Mariel's discovered South Beach. The city had had a moratorium on construction, and rents were cheap. It's a known story. They had gone down there. They were trying, I guess, to get ahead. It was hard on them, but it was even harder on the city. Nothing was happening down there. It was kind of a no man's land. But ironically, through all that, people managed to get the Joe Stone crabs, which was kind of interesting.
The crime just went off the charts literally overnight.
The rate of homicides in the city of Miami Beach, I think, went from 2 or 3 to, what, the high 30s?
Yeah, high 30s, maybe even into the 40s.
And that, as the chief says, it really wasn't just Miami Beach, it was everybody in South Florida. And that caused the problem at the medical examiner's office, where they had no space for all these homicides that were coming in.
Well, and a lot of these homicides weren't necessarily people that were residents of Miami Beach. A lot of them were Mariels killing each other. So, you know, I think it's important to make that distinction. When I was in homicide in 80-81, when the Mariel first started, I recall that if one Mariel shot another one, if that person survived, he would tell the investigators nothing to try and, you know, put this guy away. As soon as he got better and could function and work a gun, he would find that guy and kill him. It was just that simple with them. That's the way they worked. It was just all about eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. I mean, it was just justice, their own type of justice.
My next door neighbor, Jeff, was killed for his camera equipment. And my parents were like, what, are you kidding? You're living on South Beach?
When I first came on the department in the late 80s, we were still feeling the last of the fallout from the Mariel boat lift, the Section 8 housing, and pretty much the decay of the south of 5th area. Crime was just beginning to ebb after it had been pretty rough throughout the Mariel time when they brought in all these folks for the first time.
The reality was that these were hardcore criminals that were dumped on the city of Miami Beach and in Hialeah and in Miami and Gables and everywhere else. We just had probably a bigger percentage of them on Miami Beach because of that low income housing. These were hardened people. When they walked down Lincoln Road and they saw something behind the glassed windows that they wanted, they just picked up a rock or a brick, threw it, broke the window and took it. When they saw an elderly lady or a young kid and they wanted to have sex, that was an easy target for them. They didn't even think of the consequences. They would just perpetuate the crime. So we were dealing with a volume of crime that was just incrementally much beyond anything we had ever seen before.
I think another incident that I was on a call where they cut a woman's ring finger off to steal her wedding band and engagement ring. I mean, it was just terrible.
I remember while we were renovating Park Central, we would put window air conditioning units into the windows, and like an hour later, we'd be running after, you know, people in the alleys that had taken the window air conditioners out of the placement where we just put them in.
Well, one of them tried to kill the chief one night. But he wasn't the chief then. He was on the street working. But there was a little corner bar, I guess, that they all used to hang out in, and the chief heard some gunshots. Well, you can tell me.
But it wasn't unusual. I mean, I had an incident where actually the guy was in a shootout with another Mariel in a bar, and I heard the shots and drove up, and as I drove up, he was stuck in the gun in his waist, and he took one look at me, and out came the gun, and fire started spitting out the barrel. So we ended up in a shooting, and you know, unfortunately, I didn't hit him, and he was captured later, only to be found innocent by a jury who thought we made a mistaken identity, mainly because in my excitement of calling it the call, I said he had a white shirt and black pants, and it was the opposite. He had a black shirt and white pants, and they were able to convince the jury that I you know, caught the wrong guy. So,
but I can remember scenes where we'd have roving bands of men that wanted to get into the club that we just didn't want to let in there. And I can remember with baseball bats on Ocean Drive at 2 o'clock in the morning, free-for-all of fighting.
And a good point to what the chief is saying is, I think the city of Miami didn't do a lot of proper background checks on some of the people they hired, and I think we got the Miami River cops then. I believe that was a direct result of that type of hiring. So we didn't do it in Miami Beach.
So, you'd come in the morning and there'd be Coke cans with matches and safety pins and cocaine pouches all over the place. It was pretty wild.
You got to realize you can't just hire a policeman overnight. Hiring a police officer is a long-term process. By the time you do the testing process from an applicant, and then get him into the academy, and then get him into the probation where he's on the line and actually can be a functioning police officer, is over a year. So this happened overnight. So it's not like we could just say, hey, hire 50 more cops tomorrow and we'll be all the better for it. It don't happen that quick. I mean, we ran the people that we had ragged on overtime and on off-duty jobs, and all trying to minimize the impact of this crime. But we had to deal with them with what we had for quite a while.
When the Vice guys came in on helicopters out here and rappelled onto rooftop buildings and busted down a few doors, and I had seen various efforts by those people to clean this place up.
Well, the crime, of course, it was like different. Back then, drugs were huge.
The Mariels that were involved in the drug trade, from my experience, generally they were very violent. They associated with a lot of violence, a lot of ripping off of drug dealers. Now, instead of doing a transaction and we all make money, now if you showed up with money or drugs and they were on the other end, the chances are they were going to rip you off and kill you and just take whatever you had, the drugs or the money, or both.
After that, after Miami Vice and the revitalization began, the club scene took over and crime was not as violent. The scene was not nearly as crowded, the whole area, the transition, there was a lot of vacant buildings. We had a lot of activity of squatters in the buildings and things like that, but it wasn't a violent situation. There wasn't a lot of crime. The club scene was coming up, the modeling scene was very big. There was a pretty positive energy overall in the area as it redeveloped.
I used to sit at my bar and there were cops everywhere. They wouldn't mess with people, but they would keep the riffraff out. They were there to maintain the peace and make sure people had an enjoyable experience. They weren't out there trying to muscle people. They weren't trying to do anything, that was going to mess with your business. They would just make sure that if there were a person wanting to fight, they got him out of the bar and off the beach quickly. The thing with now, you don't see cops anymore. And if you do, they're in such a force here. I believe that the city government changed considerably. And I'd love to stick around and vote and tell you that I want to see a change. But the direction that I've seen it in, the direction that I've seen South Beach go in the 3 years that I've been back is, I'm moving on Monday to Hollywood. I still love South Florida. I still want to be close enough to South Beach to be near my friends who still live here, but I want to be far enough away so I don't get shanked in my parking lot.
I don't go walk down Washington now. Not too long ago, I walked down Washington like at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was hookers. The whole way, it was hookers. Like from 1235 from the corner of 12th to 14th Street, there was hookers the whole way. I couldn't believe it. I haven't been down there at night, in a long time. And it's crazy. And that started during the Memorial Day weekends because they were bringing them in from up north. The hookers would come from up there and they would come down for that weekend. And now it's kind of stayed. I mean, now you go down on the weekends, you'll see it. And it was never like that. When we had the parties in the 90s, it was never like that. Are you kidding me? You had people walking around, but it wasn't like, There's hookers. I mean, straight up prostitutes on the street, all down the street, and they're all competing. And that started, I remember that one of the Super Bowls, when we had one of the Super Bowls. I think that was one of the weekends where I remember seeing hookers for the first time on Miami Beach. But, you know, those weekends, of course, those Memorial Day weekends, that's another time when you see them. But, you know, there's another bad element for the beach.